which is great. And we're recording. That's good. And on that note, with the recording, we will have that available afterwards. And yeah. So yeah, you can use the chat if you like. There'll be you can post questions in there and whatnot. Especially while the speakers are talking today, we might they may or may not be able to sort of read the chats at the same time. So if you stick something in there, one of us as moderators, which is myself and Ingrid, will try and find those and sort of post those up. We do have a Q&A after each one of our speakers, so you'll have a chance to sort of bring those forward and probably just raise your hands or throw a question on the chat, and we'll do our best to find you there. So the kind of the format for today, if you saw the schedule that we had up earlier, I changed it just a little bit. We were looking yesterday at the lunch break there. Didn't quite make sense for all of us spread across. So we broke it up into I got 3 15-minute breaks instead. So hopefully that works for everybody. You can rush to your kitchens and grab a Pop-Tart or something for lunch and then come on back. But we'll have some 3 15-minute breaks right after each one of our presenters. And so hopefully that works, as opposed to like a half an hour for lunch. So it doesn't change our schedule too much. We still have Lois Dirksen and Corey Seibel and Candice Maxowich. So they're still going to be going. They'll each do they each have an hour and then a 15-minute block for some Q&A, for some discussion. So we look forward to that. And yeah, I'm quite excited actually to hear from each one of our presenters here today. And then at the end, kind of our last or our fourth block, I guess you could say, we are going to do a little panel discussion, a little hot topics around, just stuff that's going on in the sort of the counseling world. We've already got a couple of questions to lead off with that we'll engage with our panel. But yeah, if more come up as we go about the day, you can kind of think about that and send them in. So yeah, it's good to see everybody. All right, why don't I'm going to open with a bit of prayer. Actually, no, I'll save my prayer for just a second. I want to go through just a couple of I think they call them housekeeping items. Just a couple of things here. If you can, just use your mute button unless you're speaking. If you make a mistake and leave your speaker on or your mic on and you leave the room or whatever, I think we have the capacity to mute you. So you might come back and find yourself muted, but no, it's good just to stay there on mute unless you're going to ask a question or say something. That'd be great. You can use the chat for questions, comments. We do ask that you leave your cameras on for the duration of the session. That fosters some engagement, and at the same time, it helps us verify the audience and who all's here. Most of you are probably going to be wanting the CEUs from this, and that's how that happens. Yeah. Any questions before we get going? All right. Well, let me I'm just going to open in prayer here, and I think we got Lois Dirksen here primed as our first speaker, so she'll be coming on. And Ingrid, if you can give her the ability to share there while we're doing this, that'd be great. And then we'll get started. All right. Thanks, Lord, for a good day and for bringing all these wonderful people together. We just pray that you'd be with us today as we engage some some topics, some concepts, but at the same time, we want to be able to apply them and to our own context and just to kind of better what we're engaged with. We thank you for everyone that you bring us today, and uh, pray for everyone who's out there just working hard in the trenches, helping people and helping with a little bit of education and alleviation of suffering and healing of wounds and relationships and all that. And it's such important work. And we pray for each one of our members today that you'd be with them and you'd be with us in our little conference here, that as we engage in some learning and some interaction with each other. We just pray for a really meaningful and trouble-free day here. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. So we've got a couple of speakers that are going to be joining us today. Lois Dirkson's our first up, and I'm really excited to hear from her. Our little theme here is the intersection of faith and culture, kind of navigating modern mental health challenges for Christian counselors. And so each one of our speakers is going to kind of touch on various aspects of that. We're starting here with Trinitarian theology in the therapy room. And Lois, I will let you take it from here. You can kind of give us a bit of an introduction and then take it away.
Hey, good morning. I am just going to present this in presenter view here, and hopefully you can connect with this. Can everyone see that? Give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Okay, welcome. So my personal intro is a bit of a natural segue to introducing our topic. Psychotherapy is actually my third profession, and I came about it in a roundabout way. I grew up with rich streams of the evangelical and charismatic, and I say streams using Richard Foster's ecumenical terms for Christian tradition, but I was thirsty for this sense of embodied faith, what I came to know later as the incarnational stream. And when I first caught vision of the incarnational in my theological college, I wept. It was like a second spiritual awakening. I was finally able to integrate the dualistic paradigms of my secular and my sacred. And what a breath of fresh air. So, whilst writing a thesis on holistic discipleship and proposing a pedagogy, my thesis supervisor said, Lois, you can't write about embodied discipleship without also exploring personhood rooted in the triune God. I remember that moment vividly, unaware that those words would ignite another subsequent profession, but in a beautiful integrated way. So I did exactly that. Amongst all the dusty library books, I remember making what I now know as neural connections between personhood developed in the triune God and having this deep sense that this connects with my well-being. And I discovered that, like many pastors, I was unaware that we could support parishioners theologically in their wounded attachment patterns. More so, I had this witness inside of me that whispered to me that my pain of enmeshment would be organized in this theological framework. You see, my mother had chronic lung disease, and some of you probably can relate to the trauma of chronic disease. And whilst I was still a baby, we were separated weeks when she had part of her lung removed to sustain her life longer. I wouldn't have been able to articulate it early in my life, but I learned to suffer. She didn't intentionally invite me to do so, but there were intrinsic relational patterns laid. Shortly after writing my thesis, I embraced a season for motherhood, which is still the best chapter of my life. There has been no greater calling for me. And I was so privileged as a young mom to have a theological foundation that gave credence to the tending of the baby as worship to God. As a mama, I no longer had public platform or a pastoral profile, but oh, when I hung those cloth diapers on the laundry line, that was deep incarnational living. And thus, theology and parenting bid me to integrate disciplines even further and led me to psychology, which is why I'm here today. So before we jump in, some admin, keep the chat open. I'm going to be inviting feedback throughout the presentation, which will be in about an hour. And if you miss anything in this presentation, the PowerPoint slides will be available to you either through PACCP or you can email me. So here's our agenda. Today we're going to be looking at personhood through the Trinitarian theology lens and in a natural outworking of that, which is interdependence. We'll be looking at some therapist markers and some tools and a really neat overlap with interdependence, which is reflective functioning. And then we'll be looking at more tools as time permits. Here's a bit of a disclaimer. Some of you may not be lit up by theology, and I want to say that's okay. Stay curious in the first section of this morning, knowing that the rest of the presentation is deeply relational and pragmatic. And in the same breath, I will say our theology matters greatly for the work that we do. And my slide is just struggling here. Let's try this differently. There we go. Trinitarian theology provides a foundation with our clients, primarily because a Trinitarian lens lends itself to organically exploring personhood. And if you're a therapist, personhood is a foundational construct. It is widely held that the Cappadocian Fathers in the 4th century, upon shaping the doctrine of the Trinity, also greatly contributed to the concept of human personhood. Their goal was to define the divine persons in the relational union we now call the Trinity, but the impact extended beyond theology. They laid an indispensable foundation for psychology, and their construction of personhood is what Western psychology is built upon. So each person of the Trinity was defined in perichoretic communion, which is a bit like a coherence or a mutual indwelling. Each person, Father, Son, Spirit, relate to one another perichoretically, a mutual indwelling. And this provides us a human framework for understanding ourselves. It's important to note that perichoresis is also a restricted human analogy because we don't quite exist in the same eternal animation of the divine Godhead. So, to do due diligence here, human personhood is analogous but not univocal with divine personhood. But indeed, it does give us a foundation for our work. So, let's do something with that this morning. Let's draw upon how the Cappadocian Fathers define divine personhood and allow that to create a framework to understand human personhood. Referring to the rose-colored tab on my slide, they defined a person not as a relation, but in relation to others. Human personhood is analogous to this. What we might say is that we are ontologically created in relation. Ontologically meaning the essence of being. It's how we're created. So this is indispensable for our work. As persons, it's worth repeated, we are ontologically created as in relation. Karl Barth, a well-known German theologian, offers a German term called Mitmeinschleichkeit, meaning human withness. There's an interrelatedness. This German word, and they say if you can't say it in English, try German, right? This German word captures this in relation well. Fellow persons created to mutually give and receive. My interior or interiority is created to be in relation with others. But here's the creme de la creme. The early fathers worked out that personhood is held in tension by distinctiveness, the green tab on our slide. This too is an analogous framework for us. Our withness, our Mitmeinschleichkeit, is never held to the detriment of our particularity or our distinctiveness. This matters greatly for the work we do. Our otherness or our distinctiveness are held in tight but fluid tension, which is the blue tab. In fact, perichoresis, the Greek term the Cappadocian Fathers use, does not mean that persons are the same or blended together, or what we might say is enmeshed. No, they remain distinct within this mutual indwelling. The Trinity is a community of persons holding this tension of otherness and withness. And this is the framework of our human construct of personhood. And only, Gunton says, when both are given due stress is personhood fully enabled. In other words, personhood is enabled when our distinctiveness from others and our withness with others are balanced in equal emphasis. What a theological foundation for a work. This is our goal, fully enabling personhood. But here's the rub. Whereas this tension is perfectly maintained in the Godhead, maintaining this tension for humanity is toilsome. And as therapists, we are working out this tension both in our personal lives and in our clients' lives. Indeed, this is work and the work of our professions. You see, in the Godhead, where this tension is perfectly maintained, the Father never says to the Son, "Back up, dude, you're in my grill," like fathers would say to their sons here. Or the Spirit would never say to the Father, "Oh, come closer, I'm anxious." But alas, not so for humanity. This tension is toilsome. But the good news is that we have a secure foundation or roadmap for our praxis. Trinitarian theology provides a hospitality for the work we do so that we are not grasping at straws in the dark. So, what happens on a macro level when personhood is disregarded? Well, the outworkings of that in cultural and family structures are the extremes of individualism and collectivism. Individualism discounts the embedded sense of witness. It's like you're an island, or I'm an island to myself. It's about my self fulfillment, my happiness, which there's a lot of that in Western culture. And then collectivism collapses in on the distinctiveness necessary for personhood. Perhaps you've worked with Hutterites before who often come with the trauma of collectivism. I have one ex-Hutterite client, and we're forging a new path, not towards individualism, as that's an extreme we don't aspire to, but towards the radical middle, which we're going to explore in a moment. You see, both extremes are rooted in impoverished theology and psychology. Again, this tension between our distinctiveness and our witness is our work. Trinitarian theology provides us an indispensable foundation for every Christ follower, every pastor, every parent, every counselor. And this foundation is gift in the therapy room. So while this work is toilsome here, here's where my heart sings. There is coming a day when this will be all worked out, or what we might theologically call our eschatological transformation in the kingdom to come. I wouldn't do due diligence to my commitment of theology if I didn't note this. Our work will one day be completed. This tension will be worked out. But in the meantime, the New Testament also envisions a present, not just a future, foretaste of this eschatological human community that is gloriously, and most often, can I say laboriously, worked out in the here and now, in the already but not yet. So we invite our clients in a tasting of this appetizer, an eschatological foretaste of personhood. We get to taste it, rest in it, work in it, sigh, cry, and groan for our redemption. This is our work. So let's conclude this theological section. Trinitarian theology provides home for restoration of human personhood. As Christ's followers, we participate in the relationality of God and are given this hope-filled framework, this tension of particularity or distinctiveness and withness or our in relation. Again, this is not something I would directly share with clients, but it roots me in my work. There were two cases I did reference it overtly, and I'm going to tell you about them. Once I had a client who introduced himself to me as a vicar, and he had the white collar. And oh my goodness, what a delight it was for me to connect Trinitarian theology with his presenting problem. I also had another client in my practicum who was a theology student, and she'd been abused by her father, and she was conceptualizing how she would go home at Thanksgiving and sit at the same table with him. And so I asked her a question, something like, what would it be like to feel separate from your father, hold separate space? And she said words I'll never forget. And she said, Lois, I don't want to feel separate. I already feel so separate. And you know that moment when you have mortification wash over you and you think you've done harm? And because she was a theology student, I knew there was something that I could work with. And I immediately leaned into that. And together we actually explored another word in the Trinity, distinct. And I asked her, what would it be like for you to hold space distinct from your father? That conversation became a touchstone moment for me as therapist because it beautifully integrated the potency of my two disciplines of both theology and psychology. So what's our takeaway? What can we do this? How does this support us? This is where it gets really good. We are not created to be independent, and we are not created to be enmeshed or codependent. We are created for the radical middle, which is interdependence. I will often use my hands to illustrate this for my clients. Independence, it's like being an island to yourself. No one is surrounding you. Whereas codependency looks a little bit like this. You can't tell which finger belongs to what hand. It's like a ball of knotted, intertwined yarn. There's a detrimental fluidity between my needs and your needs. Or maybe there's blurred identities. It's a losing sense of self. So what is this radical middle? Interdependence. And this is how I illustrate it with my hands. This hand lives in boundaried existence, as does this hand. You can tell when they come together which finger belongs to what hand. And they can come together and they can come apart. And interdependence can be defined as a healthy mutual reliance where persons support each other while maintaining their own sense of autonomy and boundaried existence. Interdependent persons naturally work out this tension of others and withness, sometimes consciously because it is work, but often this is an unconscious tension. So listed here are some key human markers of interdependence. I won't go through them. They're going to be on your PowerPoint slides. What we're going to do is explore interdependence in two lanes, both as psychotherapists and as a therapeutic journey with your clients. But let's lay some groundwork first. Where does God fit into this? What's the dynamic that I'm invited to as a Christ follower and as a therapist? Well, this has been really important to me is this understanding that I co-create with God as a therapist. I participate in this relational dynamic of our triune God. And this harkens back to the human vocational calling in the Genesis narrative we received in the garden. God says, create good, tend the garden, make shalom. Some of you may have noticed my PowerPoint theme is intentionally nuanced with a crafting and nature theme, underscoring this creativeness. In co-creation, I participate. I am not a side spectator like a gardener asking God to get rid of all the weeds. Every summer, I garden with my kids, And my kids often talk about if God wouldn't be able to take care of more of the weeds. It appears that God needs or requires a high level of co-participation, right? So I'm not a side spectator asking God to get rid of the weeds, and nor am I the creator controlling every variable. I am co-creator. I participate with the divine. This is ultimately his work. And I get to tend the garden with God, and he delights when I name the animals, create magic and beauty. And here's the connection for our work this morning. When I co-create in the relational dynamics set forth by the triune God, I create space that I am a distinct person from my client because I am doing God's work. This is not Lois's self-creation. This theology is a safeguard against enmeshment and codependency with my client on one hand, and it is a safeguard against independence and lack of care of my client. As co-creator, I emulate the interdependence set forth by my triune God, which fosters a healthy therapeutic alliance. So, what are the outworkings of this? Well, let's engage with our distinctiveness and then subsequently we'll look at our withness. You know, there's a fine line between strong therapeutic presence and infusion. And this is where the model of Trinitarian praxis is so helpful. Here are a couple of tools to underscore this. When I find that I'm veering into the lane of infusion with my client, I notice that we are often mirroring each other's body language. So I might uncross my legs or change my posture differently than my client. A type of grounding, a touchstone, reminding myself to root myself in my distinctiveness. This model also supports me in self-care after session. And here's one no effort ritual that works well for me. It's a breath or a sigh. So it's like, Lord, you know how much I care. And now I release the weight of that session. That's their story. That's their life. I am distinct. This is me. Do you see how my fingers are working psychosomatically here, reinforcing that? This can also be a groan or a sigh. Don McBride has done some great work around the sigh as a therapy tool in session, and I've used it that way. I also use it as a marker of my distinctiveness, their story in, their story out. I am distinct. It's just the morning or maybe afternoon for you, but maybe this is a good time for a mutual sigh in session. Go ahead and take one. We've briefly looked at distinctiveness. I want to introduce a new word to flesh out withness. It is witness. When we are with, we also witness. Again, we are ontologically created as in relation. This connotes both a witness and a witness. As therapists, we facilitate an environment of witness, offering the resonance of our own secure interrelatedness. And then the outworkings of that, well, that's deep witness. But before we talk about how to cultivate that with our clients, let's create a framework for ourselves because professional carers need witness as well. I'm sure we could collectively talk about the deficit of witness in our profession and how lonely and weighted that can feel. I wish we had more time to talk about this, but briefly, here are 3 self-care tools that underscore your ontological constitution of witness as a therapist. Firstly, nature. After sessions, nature is a go-to for me. I have found that verbally speaking, sometimes groaning that therapeutic work in my heart aloud on a walk in nature helps me to connect with releasing that weight. You see, I can hold it in my mind and heart and kind of hope for movement and kind of think it's moving. But when I speak it out, I connect with it differently. The gravity of hearing it aloud, something like the mom I saw today wants to kill herself. I feel, hmm. This is resonance and it hits me differently and often elicits an emotional movement like tears or change in posture or pace. I have found nature as one of my best co-regulators. It witnesses pain, it absorbs pain, it offers a hug like a mother, it offers the witness. Psalm 121, one of my favorite Psalms. The psalmist is co-regulating with nature when he says, "What? I will lift up my eyes to the hills." Do you hear him co-regulate there? And then he explores the problem, says, "Oh my goodness, I need help. And where is this going to come from?" Secondly, I will say another way of cultivating this witness is involving another, sharing a loose construct of the weightedness, speaking about the weight, not the story to another. What does that look like as a therapist? Well, saying to somebody, "Today was tough," or "I feel like burying myself after all the sessions today." I've said that before. This is speaking it out to another person while still remaining in the tight confines of our ethical obligation. Your weight needs witness. You are ontologically created for that. I often tell my clients that at least one person in the world needs to know you're having a hard day. We don't need a big circle, we need a small and mighty circle. And I help my clients with a framework for this by encouraging them to arrange this in a pre-conversation with a pre-appointed person that when I text you a simple, "I'm not doing well," no other details, that pre-arranged person responds back with a simple premeditated reply, "You're not alone," or "I'm praying for you," or sending thoughts your way. You see, when we arrange this in pre-conversation, it mitigates the feeling of burdening someone and thereby usually remaining in isolation. Instead of having to fire a new neural pathway in my despair and think about who should I call or who should I text, I can move into that pre-arranged witness that doesn't feel complex and doesn't need details. We're not asking the other person to be a counselor, pastor, or have pearls of wisdom. Just simply witness the weight with heartfelt simplicity. As a counselor, you too need that witness. Somebody needs to know. My encouragement, foster that ontological witness that you were created for by pre-arranging someone who can witness that weight. Thirdly, in Christ. Many ideas come to mind, but I'm going to share one. I fiercely protect my walks in an unplugged manner. I don't even take my phone along. But recently, after meeting with a single mom in her trenches of injustices, I went for a walk with my phone because there was this song, "Is He Worthy?" that kept popping in my head. And I knew I needed to play it because I didn't know all the lyrics. And I had this hunch, this was exactly what I needed to facilitate emotional movement. And I like the version by Keith and Kristen Getty because there are children who echo the witness in the song, which is evocative and helped me metabolize the groans and sighs in my session with this client. I wish I could play this, but I'm going to simply share it in words. So, right now, if you're comfortable, I invite you to close your eyes and behold the witness in the song as I read it. Do you feel the world is broken? And the children echo, "We do." Do you feel the shadows deepen? Children say, "We do." But do you know that all the dark won't stop the light from getting through? We do. Do you wish that you could see it all made new? We do. Is all creation groaning? And the children witness, it is. Is a new creation coming? It is. Is the glory of the Lord to be the light within our midst? It is. Is it good that we remind ourselves of this? It is. Without another person, I was oh so deeply held in the relational dynamic of the triune God. I was held in witness, and my distress and groans were deeply witnessed. The echo of the song resonated in my spirit. We do. Is all creation groaning? My heart says, it is. As counselors, we need to hear that witness. Often I work from home and can go for a walk amongst the forest and meadows after sessions, but that time I was working in person in a town. So there I'm walking on Main Street of that town, quietly listening to this song, and I had my hands held in modest receptivity, and I'm sure I looked like a really interesting therapist, or perhaps somebody who needed therapy. But oh, that witness and that witness, this is what I was ontologically created to receive and then give. And because my cup had been filled, it allowed me to sit with my next client in my secure interdependence as a result of placing myself underneath cascading care. Now let's venture down the other lane and talk about witness as a therapeutic tool with your clients. Here's one tool I use called I'm So Glad You Told Me. I want to read a post by Nurtured First. I took a summary screenshot of her Facebook post so you can see the visual and find it on her thread, or you can find it on my Facebook thread, and I'll share that at the end. I read this with a client who has complex trauma rooted in childhood abuse, who is now a mother and has deep regrets of her own parenting. And what a moment we had together after reading this post. So I invite you again, if you feel comfortable, to close your eyes and connect with the potency of both witness and witness in this reading. I slightly adapted it for engagement this morning, if you look at the original. And it goes like this. I'm 3. I broke a mug. I told Dad. His first words were, I'm so glad you told me. Dad helped me clean the broken pieces. I'm 5. I peed my pants at a friend's house. I told Dad. His first words were, I'm so glad you told me. And he wrapped his sweater around me and helped me clean up so I wouldn't feel embarrassed. I'm 7, and my friend told me that she doesn't like me. I told Dad. His first words were, I'm so glad you told me. He helped mend my broken heart and explains that friendships change, helping me to see my worth. I'm 12, and my friend told me she doesn't eat anymore so she can stay skinny. I told Dad. His first words were, I'm so glad you told me. And he helps me to see that eating disorders are too big an issue for tweens to help each other with. And he steps in to make sure my friend gets help. I'm 19 and I just moved to university. Everything feels new and scary. I want to be here, but I also miss home. I told Dad. His first words were, I'm so glad you told me. We talk about how two things can be true at the same time. He misses me too, and he knows I'll be okay. I'm 30 and I just had my first baby. It feels impossible. I told Dad. He then asks me a question. Remember what I asked you when you were little? What helped you? I paused. All the most comforting moments of my life started with my dad telling me, I'm so glad you told me. My dad says, exactly. I said that to you because no one said that to me. My worries, my hard stuff, my tears were ignored. We are meant to have someone truly hear the messy stuff. I hang up the phone. My baby cries. I pick her up and place her cheek next to mine and whisper, Baby, you're sad. I'm so glad you told me. I hold her and whisper this until she falls asleep. And then I realize that being a good parent isn't about getting it right all the time. It's about the witness, the child being held in my togetherness and providing a safe place to land. It's about being the one who can say, I am so glad you told me. Well, after reading this post to this client, we were both silent, and I asked my client what she was experiencing. And I had already prepared myself for how I knew she would respond. A response entrenched in guilt and shame. Can you guess what I said to her? I'm so glad you told me. My client burst into a flood of quiet tears. It almost caught me by surprise. The sudden movement of emotion, shame replaced by vulnerability. My tears joined hers. My own tears were ones of witness, enveloped in witness, while still remaining in my distinctiveness. I was the caregiver. I showed up in my alpha self. In that moment, I knew I was the mom that she didn't have, even though we're the same age. I heard her cry, unlike the mom that didn't protect her when she was crying in the bedroom being abused by another. It was a sacred moment of what I might say was embodied witness and witness. And I ended that session so grateful to participate in the relational dynamics set forth by the triune God. Now, if theology is not your background, I don't expect you to have the same construct wash over you, but hopefully this presentation serves as a way of understanding that your work launches from this secure place. Your work is rooted in a theological foundation. With that, I want to share a favorite picture that captures this witness and witness. What do you see? Go ahead and put it in the chat. Okay, I see a few responses coming through. Yeah, there's a sorting, there's an organizing happening here. This is a picture. Yeah, listening with intent, conversation with someone, clarity. I love it. Yeah, there's a big ball of emotion. This is a picture I've often used to help illustrate what happens in therapy. And I am just going to go back here somehow. There we go. And this is also what AI can't do. Have you had that moment in therapy when a client brings up the therapeutic work that they've done with AI? And you have this sudden realization that you can't match the intelligence of what they brought into session because of the work they did with AI. And then my subsequent thought is, why'd you even come and see me? Can I say this? This picture, this witness is why they will come and see you. I will go on record saying I have no doubt that AI will impact and modify our professions, but it cannot replace them entirely. And I say the following with theological certainty. AI is not made in the image of God. You might say, Lois, well, that's kind of rudimentary. What can we extrapolate from this? If it's not made in the image of God, it's not a person, and it does not have the ontological dimensions of personhood. And for this discussion, we would say it does not hold witness. It does not have exactly what you see in this picture. I think it's worth our reflections. As psychotherapists, we would be prudent to hone in into our distinctiveness from AI and revel and delight in our offering, which is witness. This isn't something that we would necessarily overtly share, although I'm sure this is going to come into conversations, but this is something for you to own and mentalize. My encouragement, own your chair. Anyway, some food for thought there. I didn't run my response by AI. I might do that later. And actually, maybe that might be a curious venture on my part to see what AI will say about that. So I had this one very verbose client who shared a lot one session, and I could hardly offer anything, although I sure did try. And then when I asked her at the end of session what her takeaway was, I kind of asked that in a bit of like disregard or shame because it's like I don't think she'll be able to say anything. And she says, Lois, it was like I was able to organize my thoughts today in session. And I'm like, oh, I got to show you this picture. And we look at this picture, and together we conceptualize that we would slightly edit the picture, that her neural organization was a result of our witness. It wasn't me doing the organizing. She didn't say it in those words, but that's what I heard. What would you edit this picture? If so, how? Put that in the chat. That might be interesting for community here. I've also used it as a parent coaching tool. Your child's after school stories, which often come out as laments and complaints, are their ways of mentalizing. Trust me, I know right now. By listening and validating their emotions, we are helping them link their internal states to their behaviors and therefore helping them understand themselves and others better. For me, this picture serves as an anchor of witness and witness and helps me to listen on purpose and with purpose. If you want a copy of this picture, remember you'll get these slides. And I also noted on the slide where you can find the JPEG on my Facebook page. We're going to slightly shift gears. I want to connect another construct, a really neat overlap with interdependence, which is reflective functioning. As a side note, this is my picture of Lake Moraine I took in Banff this summer. And if I could, I would have us all go to Banff and do some elevated thinking there, but alas. Drop in the comments if you've been to Lake Moraine or simply would like to go to Banff and talk about theology and psychology. I'm there for it. Some of you may be familiar with Dr. Howard Steele's work on reflective functioning. His research cites that a mark of high reflective functioning in a therapist is the reason why some therapists have higher client outcomes than others. My aim this morning is to very briefly share a connection between interdependence and reflective functioning. Dr. Steele never directly correlates these, but there's a definite overlap worthy of pursuit given our theological foundation this morning. So let's first define it. It's the ability to understand mental states of oneself and others, which contributes to our self-organization and relationship quality. How is it different from interdependence? Well, interdependence is a relational pattern, while reflective functioning is a cognitive capacity, or we might say a cognitive skill. What's the overlap? Well, a high capacity for reflective functioning contributes to healthy interdependence. When we better understand our clients' mental states and needs, it naturally would lead to more empathic interactions. So essentially, counselors with higher reflective functioning, and I'll just call it RF from now on, have higher client outcomes than others because this high capacity contributes to healthy interdependence, supporting the therapeutic relationship. And this is worth leaning into very briefly, as this could be a whole other workshop. But for those interested in more, I'm going to link a great podcast in my references called Reflective Functioning and Attachment between Dr. Steele and the host of the podcast Psychiatry and Psychotherapy with Dr. Pooter. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. Dr. Steele notes reflective functioning is a scale from 1 to 9 that measures the person's ability to describe their own internal states, articulate a nuanced and unique understanding of life, thereby also increasing the ability to understand others' internal states. Essentially, it's knowing your story and authentically showing up in self as secure. And this creates an environment of hospitality for others to do the same in your presence. Listed are benefits of therapists who have high RF. I won't read these aloud, but these are really interesting and you'll have them in the notes. Just going to list a few. Improved client symptom reduction, enhanced therapeutic alliance, effective rupture resolution, professional satisfaction, etc. In documented research, therapists with the highest RF had the best outcomes. And interestingly, this accounted for 70% of what made the best therapist the best therapist. Dr. Steele says, for me, this is quite remarkable. Usually in research, he notes, we look at common factors, which are correlations of 0.3 or 30%. This research is invigorating rating. There are 23 indicators of moderate to high RF, and I'm going to briefly note two that correlate with our work today. Firstly, opaqueness of mental states. You might ask a client, why do you think your parents behave that way? A client might say, well, they were a narcissist. Dr. Steele states that's not reflective functioning. When people use clinical terms like narcissist or chronic depressive, it's not considered reflective functioning as it's drawing on some label that's widely used in clinical psychology. What I hear when a client responds that way is I hear protective functioning, not reflective functioning. I met a new online client once who began to tell me her story by labeling all the people around her as narcissists. And then she also proceeded to tell me off for the way that the Teams meeting link had been sent to her phone, but not her computer, and that people like me should know better by now. All in the first 10 minutes. I gulped for air. While I didn't do a formal assessment of reflective functioning, I got this strong sense, do you hear my opaque word there, that we didn't need to. So when we have this opaqueness of mental states, we have a hypothesis of others' feelings and thoughts. We acknowledge complexity that's underscored with a curiosity. The glass is not completely clear, Dr. Steele states. It's a little bit opaque, and he says it's like an opaque shower door. When I first heard him say that, I immediately correlated it with a Bible verse. Can you guess? 1 Corinthians 13. Now we see in a mirror dimly. So here's Paul, this brilliant author, spirit-filled believer, writer of Holy Scripture, and he says we see dimly. The notion is when I look at someone, I don't know everything they are thinking. I see dimly, and this creates safety in the therapy room. Also, a quick side note of theological safeguard, because I have to. I must say this to stay true, that the opaqueness that the apostle refers to is not referencing the truth as received from God. Paul will also say, for I know whom I believe it, and I am persuaded, etc. So we always look to the greater tenor of Scripture for understanding. But going back to the verse about opaqueness, the sense we get from Paul when referencing we see dimly is that this blurred ancient mirror has an interpersonal nuance to it, referring to our current finite understanding. I don't see everything. And that's a really good guardrail in the therapy room, which correlates with better client outcomes. For example, right now, some of you to me look interested, some tired, maybe some are multitasking, wondering when will this end? I can guess, but I cannot know for sure what you're thinking. And this explains why effective therapists have high RF. They approach a client with what? Natural curiosity, an openness to explore. There's an opaqueness. What are some of your therapeutic anchors that support curiosity? What are some of the questions you ask? Drop that in the comments. Another indicator of reflective functioning is engaging in metaphor, sometimes playfully for sheer enjoyment. Dr. Steele states that these types of people often enjoy poetry. Now, this has significance for us as Christ followers and therapists. If I were to guess which of my theological professors and pastors in my life had high RF, I would guess it was those who found home in the Psalms, those who drew comfort from the poetic metaphors of scriptures and could interpret them, play with them, and work with abstract expression. You see, the hospitality of the Psalms makes sense for all our emotions. And for the work we are doing today, let's consider the metaphor of Psalms for the unpleasant emotions. The psalmist is our guide. To consciously witness our pain is to release pain. Witnessing pain stands in stark juxtaposition to reliving it. Witnessing it is different than reliving it. Reliving it invites overanalyzing, rumination, and shame. So let's lean into this construct of witnessing and withness, connecting it to reflective functioning. I offered an exercise to a client of witnessing her own pain, and she had a very tight biblical faith framework. And she said to me, Lois, that's just weird. And so I was like, okay, let's do it with the Lord. Let's do it with the shepherd in the Psalms, which immediately allowed her to enter in. The metaphor of Psalms awaken both our witness and witness, which support reflective functioning. Nobody witnesses pain and discomfort like the psalmist. I have found the following metaphorical verses in the Psalms helpful for my faith-based clients, and we can also extract general principles for our non-faith-based clients. Psalm 38, for I am ready to fall and my pain is ever before me. The psalmist consciously is witnessing his pain and using a metaphor of falling. Now, that's a metaphor that can be unpacked in therapy. Psalm 22, I'm poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted within me. The psalmist uses simile of a heart melting like wax to describe intense physical suffering. I hear physical pain. This metaphor offers an opportunity for somatic work and observing the sensations in the body. Psalm 42:15a. Why are you so in despair, O my soul? Why so disturbed within me? Yikes, there's an exiled heart here in distress. He's asking, he's witnessing, he's showing us the importance of self-awareness. I hear reflective functioning. I reference this verse as part A because there is a glorious part B that we often duck into too quickly. These metaphors and scriptures invite us to witness pain, create space, underscoring our ontological witness. Here's my take on this. There's a linear therapeutic sequence here. Evangelicalism has a proclivity for neat packages and sometimes a discomfort in the unpleasant scriptural metaphors. What would it be like to create space in the metaphors of the first three verses prior to verses that remind us of our healing God? Again, the psalmist is inviting us to consciously witness pain. To witness pain is to release pain. As therapists, our reflective functioning, our ability to witness and work carefully and invitationally within metaphors will have resonance on our clients' RF. Psalm 34, you are close to the brokenhearted and heal those crushed in spirit. What an evocative metaphor. Crushed in the same verse as the word close. And then, and only then, when we have sat sufficiently, can we get eschatological and remind them that they weren't made for this. There is coming a time when God will wipe away every tear. There will be no more sorrow, no more death, no more crying, no more pain. It's worth saying that the journey referenced in these verses is probably more than one session. I have a wise supervisor who reminds me glacial speed, Lois. And I love that metaphorical language and reminder in conjunction with the picture of Lake Moraine, glacial speed. Today, my offering is a proposed biblical roadmap to increase reflective functioning and support a theological model of interdependence. Perhaps you too ask clients in the initial meeting what their therapeutic goals are. They won't say, I want to work towards interdependence or I want to beef up my RF, but they will say that in different ways. My son is an addict and I'm exhausted. Or my husband won't let me have access to our bank account and just gives me cash. I think something's going on. This is their way of saying, I need support in mentalizing and increasing my reflective functioning. This is their way of asking you to help them create a framework of interdependence. So I listen for that. And I understand that my reflective functioning, my mental cognitions and mentalizing, me owning my story intersects with my interdependence, my relational pattern, and this will increase my client outcomes. This is God's work. This is God's design rooted in the Trinitarian theology of personhood, a distinctiveness and witness. Again, reflective functioning, it's knowing your story and authentically showing up in self as secure. This creates an environment of hospitality for others to do the same in your presence. Something to consider for our dialogue is, what do you do to increase your reflective functioning? I'd be interested in that. This was originally built into the presentation, and because of time, we're just going to be permitted a snapshot. But with this foundation, you'll be able to flesh this out. Um, Prior to getting to the pragmatic tools, some of you may have already connected the overlap of interdependence with attachment styles, and that might be of interest for some of you to mentalize. So what's the deficit in the avoidant attachment style in terms of our interrelatedness? What's the leeching or over-reliance in the anxious attachment style? Now to skill building, I note a few things. I won't be able to share these all, but I firmly believe that skill building is an important element in fostering interdependence and reflective functioning. You see, interdependent persons naturally have these emotional regulation skills. Many of our clients have deficits that require intentional skill building. I'm a big believer in skill building. So let's look at these skills in terms of witness. I did ones witness and self and in witness and others. I think I'm going to just list A here, is taking up relationship with feelings and holding a distinctiveness from one's emotions and building tolerance of emotional discomfort. What might it be to carve out a distinctiveness from one's emotions? It's kind of like fostering an interrelatedness with one's emotions. I am distinct from my emotions, but I'm also with my emotions. But Lord knows I'm certainly not one with them. So it's building tolerance and ownership. And I find when clients get that sense of ownership, it can be invigorating. This is my storm to manage, not his and not hers. And the waves of my storm should not hit my children, my spouse, my partner, my neighbor. Um, I might do D as well here, is movement of emotions, creating an environment for movement. We don't choose emotions. Dr. Don Deloney recently said we can't choose happiness, but we can choose things that lead to happiness. Dr. John Neufeld always says the opposite of depression is not joy. The opposite of depression is movement. And so then I'll ask my clients, what's the opposite of movement? Every time they get it, stuck, stagnation. So there's movement in the interdependent relational pattern with both emotions in the sense that I can move my emotions, and also movement in the communal construct. I can come together with people and I can pull away when it gets painful. Let's just look at this interdependence in terms of tools with others. I won't go through all of them. Some of my favorite ones, especially in narcissistic and toxic relationships, is soft but not silent. What's it like to show up with dignity, not matching the emotion, but conceptually, what would I be like if I'm soft but not silent and have a response that actually carves out that distinctiveness? That's not for me. Or I had one client who could just simply go, hmm. And then one of my favorites recently is decentralizing oneself, and learning to remove yourself from the center of other people's stories. Their story, their behavior is centered around them. Their blueprint, their wounds are unresolved issues. You are distinct from that. It hurts you so much more when you make somebody else's behavior about you and when you center yourself in their story. And this is especially poignant in codependent family systems and destructive relationships. So we invite clients to create these new neural pathways into what they were already ontologically created for, which is interdependence. But you'll note that these tools really nuance the distinctiveness, carving out a space that I am not one with my emotions. I'm not the center of somebody else's. Again, this is Trinitarian theology praxis. This is my summary, essentially conclusion. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. So we are persons. What is this privilege? We're persons of witness, and distinctiveness. And this privilege can only be realized when we hold those. But let's integrate this quote biblically, and I want to close with that. Tell me actually how you would integrate it biblically. I'm not going to propose something, but other than just give a couple of reflections. I'd love to hear some of you reframe that and integrate that. This journey of a lifetime is about embodying the divine image within you, the Imago Dei, which is different than becoming a better person. Secondly, your true self is found in fulfilling the divine blueprint established by God. We recognize this relational pattern of interdependence is evident. And secondly, we recognize that it provides us a blueprint for being fully alive, like Irenaeus said. And finally, this biblical integration shifts the focus from secular self-actualization to glorifying God. The ultimate journey is transformation into the Imago Dei as seen in Christ. Here are my references. You'll note on there, and you'll get these in the PowerPoint slides, the podcast that some of you might be interested in. And you can request a copy of my PowerPoint slides. I offer my contact information as a way of connection, or you can request them from PACCP. Drop in the comments, what's your takeaway? I'd really value that and be grateful for that. What's your takeaway from this session? And Rob, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Do it again. It's not on. Okay. All right. Thanks, Lois. That was a great way to start our morning. I was furiously writing here. Uh, yes, we're interested. We've got a few minutes here of some interactive time, maybe some questions and some comments. So if you do have some takeaways and you want to speak those, that would be totally great. You can just come off mute and sort of say a few things, or you can put it in the chat like a few people are doing here. But yeah, we just encourage some a little bit of discussion here. So. Yeah, there's lots of good stuff coming through here, guys. It's good.
Yeah, so anyone have an insight that they would maybe add to the presentation? Has Trinitarian theology been a framework for you? Have you connected with that before? I'd be curious. Yeah, thank you for that feedback there. Maybe to start a conversation, what do you do to increase your reflective functioning? How do you think we can increase that if there's such a strong correlation with higher client outcomes? Hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. The work we do has divine origins.
One of the things I like to do is to offer up a metaphor for what I feel like the client is experiencing. And oftentimes it really helps because they offer back a metaphor that helps me understand better.
Hmm.
And those metaphors are just an easier way to understand feelings with them.
Hmm. Yeah. I like that. And I like what you're nuancing there is that I think metaphors need to be invitational. So I will often present one with a measure of opaqueness and say, or what do you think? Or how would you see this? And it allows them, instead of experiencing counter will, it allows them to engage, and their metaphor will inevitably be more potent than the one I offer. I
Yes.
find that they build or they integrate. So we might have ones of motorbiking or just like random things that I couldn't come with, but that actually relay that same, therapeutic work. So yeah, that's a good point. They need to be invitational, and the more ownership there is of the client, the better the outcome.
Yes. I usually preface mine with, is it like?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then they will respond back with, yes, it's just like that. Or, no, it's a little more like, and it
Mm-hmm.
just helps me understand
Mm-hmm.
what they're really feeling.
Yeah. Tasha, I appreciate what you said. I never mentioned that. There's so much to mention, but journaling is another way of witness and witness. And then maybe sharing parts with safe people around you, your small and mighty circle. I like that. That's good. Anyone else have a question or insight?
I think something that I struggle with is having a sense of a plan, like a therapeutic plan, but also staying completely curious. If I
Hmm.
tend to start to think, okay, I know where this is going,
Yeah.
and it takes real, you have to be very intentional about not assuming where you're going to stay curious.
Hmm.
I don't know, like what's a good balance there?
Hmm. Ooh, that's good stuff, Karen. You can probably tell one of my previous professions was I was a high school teacher. I always have a lesson plan. And so I work with that tension that you speak of. My gosh, do I have plans? Which is why me leaning into opaqueness and me thinking I don't know everything, I see dimly. I will also intentionally be invitational and just and for some clients or many clients they'll say I have a plan, but maybe you have something. What do you want to do today? So at that point I actually give away my that power differential and I give it to them. This is your session. What would you like to do? Often, well, sometimes they might not have a plan, other times they have something they want to do. And then isn't that good that I actually sit with that? If I were just to, motorcade through that, that would decrease client outcome radically.
And I think that kind of really to, the doorknob bombshells, maybe because we're not giving that space at the very beginning.
That's right. Right. Yeah. And then they often say, oh, and there was something else I wanted to tell you, and you're actually just winding down the session. So inviting them to set the agenda with you. What do you want to do today? What are we here to talk about? And then for some of them, they actually find comfort that I do have an idea. I don't use the word plan. I have an idea, but I'd love to hear from you. So, Elmer, if I can pick on you, I love it that you're integrating Siegel's work on development of the human mind, integrating personhood and that. Do you mind speaking to that?
Are you familiar with Siegel, Lewis?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and so I've barely plumbed to depths, but he's talking about how the mind develops as a human being, in infancy through this interrelationship between our neurobiology, our hardwiring, and relational interaction with others, and the mind, and this becomes kind of the three centers that out of which the mind emerges. And I found this quite interesting. Uh,
Hmm.
um, Years ago, teaching theology, yeah, just becoming exposed to the idea of the soul as emerging out of our bodies, our brains,
Hmm.
and not quite understanding how that works. And Siegel is articulating how this might work from a
Hmm.
neurobiological perspective, and then just bringing in the Genesis 2:7 from a theological perspective now, how God breathing his spirit into us,
Hmm.
this is a relational act
That's right.
that as he treats us as persons, we become persons.
Yeah, yeah. So he won't use the terms of distinctiveness and withness, but that's what we're wired for. So I appreciate that overlap. Talking about Dr. Siegel, one of his metaphors that I often invite clients to is the river of integration, and that there's the two river banks of rigidity and chaos. And then we explore which river bank do you think you're bumping into? Some people have it's more like a trickle, a very small stream. And as we do our work, our river gets wider and wider. We don't have to take an axe and make those river banks like crumple in. They actually just organically kind of decrease, and our river becomes wider as we do our work. That's another favorite metaphor of mine.
This is good. The ideas have come fast and furious here into the chat, and looks like you got everybody thinking there, Lois.
Mhm. Mhm. Good stuff. Good feedback. Thank you. Somebody notes, I think we're going to be talking about AI a bit later, but it would be nice to kind of lean into how Christian therapists have a special and unique therapeutic touch in juxtaposition to AI. So hopefully some of you can bring that out later.
Yeah, it's coming up as one of the prime questions for our panel a bit later. It's a bit of a
Mhm.
discussion we plan to have. So
Okay, I think I'll close it on my end then, Rob, and hand it over
Sure.
to you. Thank you all. I look forward to ongoing connection. Email me if you'd like. And what a privilege it was to sit with you this morning slash afternoon.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Lois. So yeah, as Heather mentioned, maybe you saw in the chat there, doing a bit of taking our 15 minutes here to engage in some movement. If action is an antidote to despair, then take your 15 minutes to do some of that kind of stuff. All right, we'll see you late. We'll see you in a bit here. We'll see. So we'll start back up here at well in 15 minutes. So well on my end here right now it's going to be 9:45. So all right, thank you. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Sorry about the Jordan and I are in the same room, and for various reasons, we were behind the wrong screen. So now when I'm talking, you should actually see me and not her, and then not the other way around. Sorry about that. Okay, so our next presenter here is Corey Seibel. So I am going to let him have the floor here. And Corey, you got to tell me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong or not.
You got it.
Okay.
Perfect. It rhymes with Bible.
It rhymes with
Oh,
what?
it rhymes with Bible.
Of course.
So you,
Okay.
so you nailed it.
Perfect. All right. So Corey, you're talking generationally intelligent counselor there. So I shall let you take it away. You can introduce your topic and yourself, and let's go.
Okay, very good. I just pulled up my PowerPoint. Can you all see that?
No.
Not yet.
Okay, let me. Oh, I know sorry.
There you go.
There's a crucial step that I need to do here. Okay. How about, give me just a second here.
Yeah, there you go. You got your screen there. It's just not on. There you go. That's your presenter view there. Yeah.
Okay, very good. All right, thanks for bearing with me while I got that all sorted out. Well, good morning / afternoon, everyone. My name is Corey Seibel, and my last name does rhyme with Bible. And I'm a counselor in Edmonton, Alberta. I run a private practice called Daybreak Counseling, and I'm also involved in teaching here locally in the psychotherapy and spirituality program at St. Stephen's College at the University of Alberta, and teaching psychology of religion at Concordia University of Edmonton. And I transitioned into this work into life a bit after many years working as a pastor and as a seminary professor. And in the course of my life and ministry, I developed a particular interest in the intergenerational dynamics that I saw playing out around me within the life of the church. Became intrigued by the kinds of generational differences that seem to manifest themselves within the life of the church, to have a curiosity about intergenerational relationships and what made them work and what made them not work. And became intrigued by the generational power dynamics that I watched playing out around me, and developed a heart for trying to come to understand what it would look like to nurture a harmonizing of the relationships between the generations. And so in the course of my studies, as I completed my master's degree in practical theology at Spurgeon's College in London, England, I made this the focal point of my research. And then that rolled into PhD studies at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, where I devoted my research to wrestling with some key intergenerational questions that had emerged for me. This opened doors of opportunity for me to become part of a broader global community of people from around the world who also were developing curiosity and a heart for these kinds of questions, and became involved in a global community called the Intergenerate Conference. And this brought together people from all around the world that were wrestling with these kinds of questions, and ultimately had the privilege of becoming the chair of the planning team for the Intergenerate Conference. And ended up publishing 3 books on topics related to generations in the church, and was invited to be the co-author of the 10-year anniversary update of intergenerational Christian formation with Holly Allen and Christine Lawton, which is kind of the definitive volume on this, published by InterVarsity Academic. And so this has been a rich part of my own journey. But in the midst of it all, I really sensed the Lord doing a new work in me and inviting me to transition into something very different. And so I went back to school to get trained to become a counselor. I completed my internship, and it's brought me down the path that I find myself on now. And so I chose largely to at first I really felt that all of that was perhaps part of an earlier chapter of my life, and that I was essentially leaving it behind. But now I really am recognizing the potential benefit in putting forth an effort to try to translate aspects of that previous work that I was doing into the realm of our professional practice as therapists. And so you heard earlier that our focus throughout the day-to-day is on aspects of culture. And so today I would like to share with you what I think we should understand as one important aspect of culture that we encounter in our therapeutic practice. And one that I would argue, and I think that perhaps we'll gain a little bit more of an appreciation of this as we journey forward together, is under-addressed in the literature on culture in our therapeutic practice. So to begin, I thought I'd just share with you a few scenarios that perhaps help to illustrate some of the sorts of things that we're going to be unpacking together during this time. So in the first scenario, a 33-year-old Gen Z client tells her 55-year-old therapist, "I felt really anxious about our last session and messaged you on Instagram, but you didn't reply." The therapist, a baby boomer, feels caught off guard. She's always kept a strict boundary between personal and professional life and doesn't use social media for client contact. She wonders how to explain her boundaries without dismissing the client's expectation that online messaging is a valid form of connection. Or a second scenario where a 28-year-old millennial client shares, "I use they, them pronouns, and I'm exploring polyamory." The therapist, age 68, sincerely wants to be supportive, but struggles with unfamiliar terminology and cultural references. At one point, he unintentionally says she instead of they. The client looks visibly hurt. The therapist must decide how to repair trust, recognizing that generational differences in exposure to emerging identity language can impact therapeutic rapport. Or a third scenario, a 60-year-old client comes to therapy after retirement, struggling with loss of identity. "My whole life was about working hard and providing. Now I don't know who I am." The therapist, a 32-year-old millennial, believes strongly in work-life balance and often encourages clients to prioritize rest and relationships. She notices tension. Her client interprets such advice as minimizing the dignity of her lifelong sacrifices. The therapist must find a way to honor the client's generational values while still supporting healthier adjustment. Now, these are just a few scenarios, a few examples, but they illustrate some of the kinds of scenarios that we might encounter as we work with clients from across the generations within our own practice. And as we encounter some of these sorts of differences, they pose challenges for us, they raise questions for us. And we want to provide ourselves some opportunity during our time together today to wrestle with those questions and challenges. An author who has been particularly influential for me and whose work I really appreciate is Henry Nouwen, and one of his perhaps lesser known books is a book called Aging, but it's a powerful treatise on intergenerational dynamics and a theological and spiritual reflection upon aging. And he says, we believe that aging is the most common human experience which overarches the human community as a rainbow of promises. It's an experience so profoundly human that it breaks through the artificial boundaries between childhood and adulthood, and between adulthood and old age. So noun here is essentially saying that when we think about our relationships with one another across the life course, young, middle-aged, and old, that we're essentially all in this together. And in a very real sense, this is true, what Nouwen is expressing. But there is a sense in which he's trying to convince us of this against the backdrop of the reality that we don't always experience things this way, or we don't always perceive them this way. And at times we maybe look at things this way, as though there are these experiential gaps that exist between us. And there are senses in which this is very true, where our experiences are different and they cause us to see the world different and to experience the world differently. But some of these gaps perhaps aren't as gappy as we might think that they are, or they're perhaps not as great as we think they are. And in some cases, the media plays a role in contributing to our perceptions of those gaps. But it's important for us to appreciate nonetheless that not just the objective the reality of any gaps that might exist between the generations, but our perceptions of those gaps matter a great deal. The subjective perception matters immensely. As we perhaps at times find ourselves viewing one another through stereotyped lenses based upon generation and age. If you can scroll back to shortly before COVID began, that feels in some respects like ancient history now. One of the things that was kind of all the rage in the news for a very brief time before COVID took over the front pages was stories that were circulating about the phenomenon of okay boomer. And this began with a politician using this expression in a public setting in New Zealand, and then it began to spread around the world as an expression of antipathy on the part of younger people toward older people. And it got lots of play, TikTok and Instagram. But as someone who's been interested in these issues, I thought it was also important to appreciate all the ways in which it was evident that these were sentiments that also lived in the hearts and minds of many people and had an impact on how they viewed and related to people of other ages. And so part of what I want to do first here today is to give us an opportunity to sketch out briefly a bit of a framework for understanding generations and what contributes to how generations are formed in distinction from one another. And then we're going to kind of take that and work with that and apply it to the work that we do as therapists. So first, it's helpful just simply to state that every generation develops a distinct peer personality composed of similar patterns of belief, values, behavior, and ways of expressing social identity that is born out of the fact that each generation has what scholars refer to as a distinct age location in history, which means that the members of a generation are bound together by being born within the parameters of a certain period of time. And then as they journey through the life course together, they find themselves shaped in similar ways by shared experiences. And this leads to the development of this kind of peer personality where the members of a generation perhaps have these similar beliefs, values, and ways of behaving and ways of expressing their social identity. So this is key. So I would encourage you to hold this concept in your mind as we journey on here. One cartoonist gives this expression in kind of a silly and perhaps slightly sarcastic way in this graphic that you see on the screen that depicts three generations that likely are represented among us today. The boomers that would view their life course as not the 60s, not like it was in the 60s and in their 60s. I think they're just being silly here. Or Gen Xers that have journeyed through the life course, whining about boomers wearing plaid and whining about millennials. Again, I'm not sure to what extent that's altogether fair. And then you can see how this cartoonist is depicting millennials with just a series of new iPhones that are released. Well, maybe that's not exactly how it is, but you kind of get the idea there. One of the things that I have developed as a framework for understanding how generations develop is what you see on the screen here, which speaks to the three aspects of how generational identity develops over time. Of course, every generation plays an active role in forming its own generational identity. We kind of see that being put on display right now as the younger generations use social media and other tools to create and to communicate and to develop their own language, their own lingo, their own kind of cultural reference points. So every generation does this. We play an active role in shaping our own engagement with the world, and in the process, generational pure personality emerges. Secondly, however, I think it's important to recognize that there is an interactive dynamic to this, that no generation comes into this world and finds its way ex nihilo. No generation is an island unto itself, to paraphrase John Donne, as though it's developing its sense of identity in isolation from the world of the generations that preceded it. So the younger generations are always interacting with the world that has been imparted to them by their elders. And then this is key. To the extent that that is true, there's also a reactive dynamic to that. As each one of our generations, as we've come up, we have witnessed the world that we've inherited from our elders, and we have to some degree reacted against that. We have formed our own generational way of being in response to what we've inherited from our elders. And I would like to say that I think pretty much every generation has a tendency to view the generations that have gone before them as both heroes and hypocrites. So I think we can look at our elders and recognize all of the ways in which, through all of their blood, sweat, and tears, all of their effort, that they have made the world a better place. But each generation also is prone to look not only at the well-fought battles that their elders have fought, but also to recognize the ways in which perhaps they perpetuated injustices, or where they were guilty of neglect, or of certain excesses, or where they conducted themselves in a way where we perceive them as guilty of certain blind spots. And so I think it's important for me as a therapist to recognize that every time an individual of another generation comes and sits in my office, that this dynamic could very well be in play. It could be someone who belongs to one of those generations whose world I interacted with as I was developed as a member of my own generation, that to some degree I may be party to reacting against. And this may be true of younger people that come to sit in my office as well. They may be reacting against a world that I have helped to form, and that is really important to me. And recognizing this, I can also recognize the ways in which there could potentially be these intergenerational transferences on the part of my clients that are present, but also generational counter transferences that could occur for me in my interaction with my clients. Now, I think that it's helpful to just pause briefly and recognize the as we try to navigate this landscape of the generations that exist together at the same time, that we all are impacted by three distinct dimensions that weave together to give shape to our generational story. The first is cohort, which is just another way of talking about generation. Also, there's and each generation, each cohort, we have our own distinct experience. But then we also uh, are impacted by where we are in the life course or life stage. And there is an extent to which uh, my experience of life stage is similar to what others are experiencing, to what my clients are experiencing, even if they belong to another generation. For those of us who are men, it's generally true that it's at a similar age that the first hairs begin to emerge on our chests. It's just a reality of the life course. And we're generally at a similar age when the first hairs begin to disappear from our heads, perhaps. And that's because as human beings, we have our journey through the life course in common. And then there's also these realities of culture change that impact all of us, regardless of age. And we can think about all of the manifold ways that our shared journey through COVID, for example, has impacted all of us, regardless of age. And how, as technology changes, that it influences all of us to some degree. This was really illustrated for me about 20 years ago when I visited my great aunt Grace at a Mennonite Sears facility in California. And as she was sharing with me about her life there as part of that community, she took pride in the fact that she ran uh, the PowerPoint for the worship services in her seniors facility. And I thought, wow, they have PowerPoint in the seniors facility. The world really is changing, isn't it? And so it just goes to show that as our world changes, that we're all impacted by that. But nonetheless, amidst those changes, it's often the up and coming generation that is most impacted by this, and where there is this sense that our experience is different and distinct. Margaret Mead, who is a celebrated anthropologist, summarized it this way: that in the midst of cultural change, the younger generation tends to look at their elders and say, "You've never been young in the world in which I'm young, and you never can be." So we kind of see that in this little cartoon as these kids are gathered around the telephone, marveling at culture change, perhaps scratching their heads a little bit, and it helps us appreciate how different their experience has been and how differently they have been shaped by culture change. And it reminds me of an experience that happened years ago when we went to visit my in-laws in Virginia. Our daughter was born into a home where we had already made the transition to cell phones several years before she was born. And she walked into the kitchen and she said, "Mom, Dad, look at this. Grandma and Grandpa have a phone on the wall with a cord on it, so you'll never lose it. Isn't that a smart idea?" And we thought, what an interesting perspective. But it was something that was foreign to her experience. That would be understandable if some of us have some pushback to want to exercise some care, not to too quickly buy into these broad brushstroke descriptors of generations, as if we can say all boomers or all millennials. Uh, in reality, generational experience looks a lot like what you see on the screen here, that there's many respects in which these shared characteristics are true to a certain degree of most people. But then there are some who might be outliers and might experience their generational identity a bit differently. The renowned American evangelical scholar Robert Weber, who passed away a number of years ago, would refer to some of these people as cross-generational surfers, people who belong to a certain generation but perhaps manifested some qualities and characteristics that made them outliers within their own generations. And then I think it can be helpful, particularly as we try to prepare ourselves to translate this into the clinical setting, to recognize that there is a psychosocial dimension to this, that my story intersects with the story of my generation. Um, Even if I don't see myself as a winner within my generation, or perhaps I see myself as a winner according to the values and expectations of my generation. My story intersects with the story of my generation. I have some clients who will express concerns that they feel like they're falling behind relative to their peers. And to some extent, this reflects where they are in their life stage, but oftentimes it also reflects the cultural values of their generation by which they're evaluating themselves and the markers of progress and of success. So I think it's important for us to appreciate the extent to which that's true for our clients and for ourselves. So I want to invite you just to take a moment here before we proceed on and to ponder. I'm curious what you'd say would be some of the music that stands out for you as particularly important within your generation, maybe some movies. And are there events or experiences that you can identify that you would say would have most significantly shaped your generation? And if you want to drop some thoughts into the chat, we would welcome them. All right. Well, I will let you kind of continue to ponder that a bit, and I think we will invite you certainly to drop anything that you might have to contribute into the chat. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Oh yes, I hear 9/11 is key. The Beatles, pop music, Americana, folk music, Lightfoot, James Taylor. Ooh, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I can relate to that. Mm-hmm. All right, we have lots coming in there. It's kind of fun to think about those markers, those reference points for us in terms of our generational experience. So our current reality, the reality within which you and I are seeking to engage in therapeutic practice, is a situation in which the complexity of intergenerational relations has been heightened by the rate of cultural change and the fact that so many generations are living together at the same time, which is a result of the increased life expectancy of our population. Uh, Ancient scholars in places like Greece and Egypt were intrigued by the impact of generations. There were individuals back in the 1800s sending up warning flares about the concerns they had about the impact that generational change was having in society. And over the course of the last 100 years, there's been a growing social scientific literature investigating these kinds of questions. But despite all of that, what we are living currently is unprecedented in that we have, most scholars would agree, 6 to 7 generations that are living contemporaneously. And we can think about all of the change that is represented amongst those generations. And I encountered the challenges associated with that in my own therapeutic practice. I was thinking about the age range represented with my client base. And my youngest client, I don't see children. So my youngest clients have been 13, and my oldest client was 93. That's an 80-year age gap. And if social scientists are correct, that's a 5 generation leap between my youngest and my oldest client. This is certainly something that has relevance for us here in Canada, but there's even a growing concern for the impact of generational change and generational complexity around the world in places like Ghana, West Africa, or Kenya, East Africa, or Papua New Guinea and South Korea, as around the world we experience the impact of culture change. we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is a graphic that kind of just maps out for us what we're talking about. Uh, there are just a few members of the GI generation still left among us, but most of the people who we likely are going to encounter in our practices are going to come from the silent generation and up in what you see on the screen. Within my own family, my great grandmother was a member of the lost generation. My grandmother was a member of the greatest generation of the GI generation. My parents are from the silent generation. I'm a Gen Xer, and my daughter is a member of Gen Z. And what you see here, these are kind of approximations, approximate age ranges. The edges are perhaps kind of fuzzy sometimes in the transitions between generations. But this gives us a little bit of a grasp of the landscape of the generations who are living around us and who we might encounter on the couch in our own offices. And as we think about how we are existing together at the same time, we can see that these are some of the sorts of challenges that emerge in response to our generational values and ways of being and functioning, and how we've been shaped amidst a changing culture. Touches on issues like communication style, technology use, work values, how authority and hierarchy functions, issues of identity and diversity, or attitudes towards mental health, issues related to privacy and disclosure, religion, spirituality, family, relationships, and even approaches to coping and to resilience. We can see that there are differences in how these things are approached generation to generation. Now, as we let all of that sink in, it helps me appreciate that as somebody who's kind of postured in the midst of it all as a Gen Xer, which you can kind of see here, we find ourselves right in the thick of it all. And I was a middle child in my family, so I feel fairly comfortable being part of the middle child generation at the present time. At times, these realities are stretching for us. They may even be slightly disorienting for us. You might be familiar with this YouTuber, Joma, who's a polyglot, and he goes around the world and learns local languages and impresses people when he puts on display how he's in such a short amount of time mastered local languages. He even did an episode in an indigenous community in northern Saskatchewan. But what you see here is a picture from a presentation that he gave at a high school where he had studied Gen Alpha language, and he gave a speech to the student body entirely in Gen Alpha slang. And as I was watching this, I could feel the impact of not entirely being sure that I understood the difference between cap and no cap, or what Riz or Sigma means, or what on earth is skibbity. And I am somebody who has been plopped into many strange cultural environments and have felt a measure of relative comfort. But as I watched this video, I could feel a sense of terror and disorientation arising within myself, like I'm clearly more out of touch than I realized that I was. And as he was using these words, I've been trying to study Korean for the last few years, and I thought this feels more overwhelming than Korean to me in some respects. And so it just, I think, illustrates some of these challenges. And so it means that we have these moments where we're trying to understand and to interpret ourselves to one another. And we encounter these realities within the workplace, within the family, within our churches, our community, within the academy, and online. And of course, within the therapeutic setting as well. And so I'd invite you to ponder for just a moment where perhaps you may have encountered intergenerational challenges in the lives of your own clients, and where perhaps have you been personally impacted by intergenerational challenges in your own life as well. Where have you encountered intergenerational challenges in the lives of your clients? And where have you been personally impacted by such experiences in your own life as well? And I'm going to probably move on here for the sake of time, but I would encourage you, if you as you care to drop any thoughts you might have related to that into the chat as we proceed here, to identify some of these kinds of challenges as they've turned up in your life and in your clients' lives. But here are just some examples of the ways in which we might experience this in the therapeutic setting in our work with clients related to things like communication style, where a Gen Z client expects therapist responsiveness via text, but perhaps you might belong to a generation where you'd prefer phone, or to just let that kind of communication occur within the context of a scheduled session. Or we could think about the impact of work values, where someone of my generation might view a Gen Z therapist's emphasis on flexibility as not altogether not altogether realistic or reflective of how things work in the world as I would see it. Or we could think about a young therapist who discusses pronouns comfortably, but an older client who feels a kind of confused or disoriented about that. Or we could think about a boomer therapist who emphasizes commitment in marriage, whereas a millennial client questions staying in a marriage that they experience as stagnant. These are just some of the kinds of places where we might encounter this. So as I've tried to bring some of this work into the realm of therapeutic practice, I got curious about the extent to which attention has been given to this in the literature, and discovered that the literature on this subject is actually quite scant. What you see on the screen, I may have missed some things, but to the best of my knowledge, is a fairly comprehensive bibliography of the published works on this topic over the course of the roughly last 25 years or so. You can see that about every 10 years, something pops up that invites us to think about this topic. But what I would see as one of the most important contributions to this is the PhD dissertation that was done by Betsy Nesbitt, who was a member of the counseling faculty at Denver Seminary in the States for 10 years. And she did a doctoral dissertation that was focused upon generational affiliation as a component of culture. And she says of her own study that the purpose was to explore the multicultural elements related to generational affiliation. Results indicated that, in keeping with the American Counseling Association's call for counselors to be multiculturally competent, generational culture should be incorporated into counselor training and continued education. So it's really helpful for us, I think, the connection that she's making explicit here. This idea that we should view generational culture as a dimension of, or a subset of multicultural competency. And so with that in mind, what I'd like to devote the remainder of our time to here is to introducing to you the model that I have been working at developing of what I call generational intelligence. I'm not the only person who's used this kind of language, but I'm trying to work with the concept of generational intelligence in my own way. And you'll see that for the sake of abbreviation, I'll be referring to it as GQ. I don't think that's probably trademarked anywhere, is it? But we'll kind of use that today as shorthand for generational intelligence. And I would define generational intelligence as my ability to reflect and act with an awareness to my own and my clients' generational identities. And generational intelligence invites me to be in tune with the ways in which my thoughts, my feelings, and my values, how I are impacted by my generational location or my generational identity. And it invites me to be attentive to how I'm aware, how I act, how I interact, how I react, and the effect that my generational location has on my sense of who I am and how I behave in the presence of my client, and how those things are true for my client as well. And in a sense, this really links up with what Lois was saying earlier about reflective functioning. I think there's a sense in which we'll find that the generational intelligence model is a form of reflective functioning. And I think that GQ, generational intelligence, matters because as counselors, we find ourselves confronted with generational differences in our work with our clients. Invariably, we will face these. And as counselors, it's important for us to be self-aware and honest about the fact that we have been shaped by a particular generational experiences that influence how we perceive and how we feel about and how we behave toward others. And so to aid us in counseling effectively within our complex generational context, it'll be helpful for us to discover how to navigate the generational dynamics that we encounter in our clients' lives, within ourselves. And I would say this is key in the space between us as we work therapeutically with our clients. And this matters for us because if we pause to consider the impact of our generational formation upon ourselves, we can recognize that our generational location functions to a degree like a lens that impacts how we see and experience the world, but it also functions like a mirror that that causes us to evaluate and reflect upon ourselves in a certain way. I can appreciate, for example, as a Gen Xer, how many of my boomer elders who grew up in this generation that was called the pig and the python, because it was the biggest generation in terms of demographic force in history in North America. But it also meant that you had to grow up in an environment that was highly competitive because you were competing with a lot of your peers for progressing and achieving and succeeding. And so it's an example of the ways in which generational values, generational experience can play a role in how I look at myself. But also, like all other aspects of cultural location, my generational experience is something in which I'm immersed. I swim in it, and I am aware of this to greater or lesser degrees. And so I think it's important for all of us to be conscious of these things within ourselves and to be willing to consider the impact that this has for us. So my model of generational intelligence has four key components that I want to invite you to explore together with me here briefly in the time that we have remaining. And they are awareness, which speaks to the degree to which I am mindful when I interact intergenerationally. Appreciation, which is my ability to critically, empathetically understand intergenerational issues and differences. Action, which speaks to the extent to which I am able to appropriately and congruently adjust my own behavior when interacting intergenerationally. And allegiance, which addresses my capacity or my willingness to demonstrate intergenerational fidelity over time. And as we think about generational intelligence and the value that it can pose for us, I'm going to unpack each one of those in turn here in just a moment. But as we consider this framework that I want to share with you, it can be helpful to us in functioning in our counseling work intergenerationally in a more intelligent manner in at least two key respects, in that it will invite us to be like a good intelligence officer, so that when we encounter something with a person of another generation that we don't understand, that we would be curious about that, and we'd be willing to go on a search for information, for data, for understanding, but also that we would then use that information intelligently in a discerning manner that reflects clinical judgment. So we want to use this framework that I am sharing with you today in a manner that reflects intelligence and that enables us to conduct ourselves in a more generationally intelligent manner. So the first dimension of this is awareness. And the first step really is to become more mindful of my own and the generational others' generational location. Just simply to be aware of the fact that there is a generational dynamic that is present. And that makes me less likely to project my own values onto the generational other. And it also protects me from interpreting the words and the actions of the other as meaning the same thing for them that they would for me based upon my own generational experience. This awareness will hopefully help to protect me against the prospect that I could fall into some sort of generational countertransference where I relate to the client in light of some sort of generational stereotype or bias or perception or perhaps even wound that I carry. It might also, if a client brings a generational struggle from their own life, perhaps something that they're facing with a boss or a parent or in some other arena of life, this awareness hopefully is going to also help me avoid falling into a generational alliance with my clients or with their parents, depending on whether the client is a member of my generation and sees things the way that I do, or perhaps their parent is a member of my generation, and I find it easier to sympathize with the parent's perspective because of our shared values. And I could, if I'm not careful, uncritically and unconsciously pick sides based upon my own generational experience. And so it's helpful as I try to approach these interactions with awareness to be conscious of the fact that above the waterline, there are these things that I experience in terms of generational artifacts, pop culture, clothing, language, organizations, ways of relating, technology, things of this sort. But that under the water, that there are all of these generational values and assumptions that may be coming into play. And so I want to be fostering an awareness of this reality. And of course, as therapists, we should be masterful at this because by definition, we are a people who have committed our lives to being curious about what's happening under the surface in the lives of our clients. And so again, what Lois was emphasizing earlier about reflective functioning can be really helpful to us here in seeing the need to be fostering this kind of awareness that there is a generational dynamic that is present. So I want to share with you a case that would illustrate this awareness in play. So Maria is a 58-year-old counselor who's meeting with her new client, Jordan, a 21-year-old university student experiencing anxiety and burnout. Early in their sessions, Maria notices a recurring pattern. Jordan frequently references the pressure of hustle culture, the constant comparison on social media, and the need to build a personal brand. These concepts initially feel foreign to Maria, who began her own career before the rise of digital culture. But rather than dismissing them as trivial or unfamiliar, Maria acknowledges internally that a generational difference exists between her and Jordan. This awareness prompts her to pause and to avoid interpreting Jordan's concerns through her own midlife lens, allowing space to see how deeply these issues impact young adults. So Maria's being a helpful model to us here. We'll hear further from her, but let's journey on to the second dimension of this model of generational intelligence, GQ, which focuses on appreciation. Now, if you surf through the various dictionary definitions of appreciation, you'll find that it tends to emphasize a couple of themes that appreciation has an affective dimension to it, that there is emotion to appreciation. When you listen to good music, or you consume beautiful art, or when you taste savory cuisine, it does stir something in us at an emotional or an affective level. But appreciation also entails insight or informed understanding. Appreciation is a word then that encapsulates both a cognitive and an affective dimension, understanding and feeling. And so as we translate generational intelligence into our clinical work, both of these aspects of appreciation have relevance. So that as I'm sitting with a client, I'm aware that there is a generational dynamic present. I'm going to try to appreciate that at the level of understanding and at the level of, uh, of affect. And so I'm going to try to see from the generational other's point of view and to empathize with the generational other. And I'm going to try to pay attention to what's happening in the space within me, what's happening at the level of my own feelings, my own thoughts that perhaps are being stirred up by whatever's taking place. And then to be monitoring what's happening in the space between us as well, what's happening in the interaction between me and the generational other, my client. And along the way, I'm going to be seeking information to try to confirm or to negate my interpretations of what's happening with the client, my understanding of their experience. That may be as a result of things that I do in session by inquiring with my client in an effort to try to better understand, or it perhaps may involve work that I need to do between session as I engage in reading aimed at coming to a better understanding of the generational values and experiences of people like my client. As I try to appreciate, there's three postures that I could take, a couple of which aren't tenable, they're not viable, and one of which I think we would do well to embrace. The first would be to assimilate, where I actually try to become like the other. And going back to that thing that I was saying earlier about Joma and his speech that he gave in Gen Alpha dialect, I can only imagine how badly it would crash and burn if I, a 52-year-old man, dared to use expressions like no cap with one of my young clients, and how devoid of congruence that would be. And so I don't really think that's any option here, just as it wouldn't be as if I was working with someone where there was another kind of cultural dynamic present. A second would be to immunize. And I think it's important to be aware of this, that as we think about these interactions through the lens of intergroup theory, that there are stereotypes that sometimes are present, the perceptions of us and them. And if I'm not careful, if I've had certain kinds of negative generational interactions, I could perceive those as false positives that demonstrate to me, see, I'm just not cut out to engage with those kind of people. And you're probably wondering, Corey, why is there a troll on the screen? And some of you, perhaps, if you have had the opportunity to be around younger people, the time when my daughter was young, I guess this probably isn't even like what's popular now, but when my daughter was young, Dora was kind of all the rage. And there was a character on Dora called the Grumpy Old Troll Who Lives Under the Bridge. And he had a song, the Grumpy Old Troll Who Lives Under the Bridge. But this tradition actually goes all the way back to the 19th century Norwegian folktale, The Three Billy Goats Gruff, that had this menacing troll that would guard the bridge and prevent passage. And for us, if we're not careful, our generational stereotypes and our generational negative experiences could be the grumpy old troll that actually prevents us from crossing the bridge of relationship and understanding. They would say, don't go over there. And it might discourage us from trying to span the gap of understanding that exists between ourselves and our clients. And so really striving to accommodate our clients, to take a client-centered approach and to empathize with their experience, I think is the best way for us to conduct ourselves. We see this in Maria, who instead of assuming that Jordan is simply overreacting to modern stressors, intentionally learns more about the cultural realities shaping his worldview. She asks open-ended questions like, what does it feel like for you when peers when you see peers posting about their achievements, and how does social media shape your sense of who you should be? As Jordan opens up, Maria empathizes, not by pretending she shares the same experiences, but by acknowledging the legitimacy of the pressure that he feels. She reflects back, it sounds exhausting to constantly measure yourself against others who seem to be succeeding, By demonstrating empathy rooted in understanding, Maria helps Jordan feel seen and validated, reducing his fear that his struggles might be dismissed as youthful exaggeration. So, as we work at fostering awareness and appreciation, it leads us to a capacity to act in an intentional and a self-reflective kind of manner, and with a sense of freedom, where my actions aren't dictated by my own generational identity, but by my efforts to conduct myself with understanding and with empathy. And it enables me to be attuned to the impact of the behaviors that might occur between me and my clients that could be problematic. The behaviors of the other that maybe annoy, offend, or confuse me. I may, with this kind of perspective, relate to some of those things differently, but also to be conscious of some of those behaviors in me that might annoy, offend, or confuse the other. And you see three images on the screen here, one of which sort of illustrates a bit of a stalemate, a relationship of distance that exists at the demilitarized zone between South and North Korea. And sometimes we can conceptualize intergenerational relationships a bit like this distance, this standoff. But when we use a generationally intelligent a kind of approach to our engagement with our clients, we can break the chains of the scripts that our generations give us, and we can develop a greater capacity to dance with our clients intergenerationally through how we mold our helping skills, how we use interventions that would be sensitive to their generational experience, and how we use our own interpersonal skills with congruence to try to relate across generational differences. Maria illustrates this for us in her awareness and understanding that she brings into her practical counseling interventions with Jordan. She incorporates discussions on boundary setting with technology. She explores mindfulness practices to reduce compulsive comparison and introduces cognitive reframing strategies to challenge the belief that Jordan's work is tied solely to online metrics. At the same time, she carefully draws on her own generational perspective in a supportive way, sharing how earlier generations often faced career uncertainty differently, encouraging Jordan to see his anxieties as part of a broader human struggle rather than a unique personal failing. And by weaving together generational awareness, empathy, and concrete strategies, Maria bridges the generational gap and empowers Jordan to develop healthier coping mechanisms. And so we see in Maria how a counselor's progression from awareness to understanding to action can transform a potential obstacle into a therapeutic strength. Maria's ability to notice generational differences, empathize with their impact, and act with intentional strategies enables her to connect meaningfully with Jordan despite their distinct life contexts. Now, there is one more dimension, which is allegiance, which speaks to my capacity or my willingness to demonstrate intergenerational fidelity over time. And I intentionally used that word fidelity, which is one of the core ethical principles that show up in many professional bodies' codes of ethics. My demonstrating faithfulness to my client. And this speaks to the ways in which intergenerational interactions can be challenging, and my need to renew my commitments over time to engaging in this kind of work, even when it's stretching and disorienting for me. And I can't help but wonder to what extent this may actually have something to do with why gerontological counseling is such a neglected specialization within our profession, because of how perhaps at least some among us may find it really hard to engage in that kind of work over time. But as we stick with it, I personally, in my own work, practice from a perspective called the relational spirituality model, which was developed at Boston University, and it draws upon attachment perspectives and systems perspectives. I do a lot of work with clients on self-differentiation and on relational psychodynamic perspectives. And as we think about how those things show up in our clients' lives, so often they have intensely and integral intergenerational dimensions to them. And so to understand my client relationally and to understand them contextually, it's helpful for me to be able to grasp the intergenerational inner workings of all of that. And also to recognize that in my interactions with the client, that the relationship itself can be healing, and that our relationship actually has the potential for both of us to be a healthy intergenerational interaction that can bring intergenerational healing as we work together. And so I'm inspired by what Jürgen Moltmann has to say, that as we accept one another as Christ has accepted us, we're provided this new orientation, one that opens us up for others as they really are, so that we gain a longing for and an interest in them. And it invites us beyond friendship within a closed circle of the faithful and pious towards open friendship with those who are different from ourselves. Now, we may not be befriending our clients in the strictest sense, but I think that what Moltmann has to say here has relevance for us, and that as we think about ourselves in relation to clients from across the life course and all generations, that in Christ we have been opened, we've been invited and challenged to open ourselves up to have these kinds of interactions with the generational other. And I'm inspired by the fact that those interactions, Lois was speaking to this earlier about what is to come. There's a sense in which these intergenerational interactions foreshadow what is to come. And that as we find ourselves in the new Jerusalem, that will not only be a place where there will be all tribes, tongues, and nations present, but where there will be all generations present together at the same time as well. And so there is a sense where in the therapy space, in that space between myself and the client, we can taste of something of the culture of heaven. And I can live out there the prayer that thy kingdom come, thy will be done here in this room on earth as it is in heaven. And as we do this, and I'll conclude here because I know we're at the end of our time, it gives us an opportunity to lean into and to live into what Miroslav Volf speaks to. He speaks toward that concern of all of the ways that we can other one another. And he invites us to recognize that in Christ, we've been called beyond these clean identities where, I have my kind of people that groups us against them. And at times in our cultural discourse around generations, we're guilty of this, but in Christ, we're invited beyond all of that. And I believe we've been called to be generationally Catholic counselors. I draw this from the work of Dan Sheffield from Ontario, who wrote a book a number of years ago called The Multicultural Leader. And in this, he pictures the leader as someone who has an ecumenical spirit and that they are striving to be Catholic, or Catholic means universal, where in my heart, I carry in my heart a desire for and a commitment to people of all generations that I interact with and work with in my practice. And so one author says, as we contemplate that idea of generational Catholicity in our work as counselors, he says, the business of the body of Christ is to build bridges between the generations. And the wood used for the bridge is the cross of Christ. And so to summarize, again, GQ is this ability to reflect and act with an awareness of our own and our clients' generational identities. And we can express this in our work through fostering awareness and this appreciation that has both a cognitive and an affective dimension, through action and through our allegiance, our fidelity to this work across time. And this is something that we can practice elsewhere in our lives as well. Well, I'm going to wrap her up here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, to participate in any interaction that seems helpful at this point. I am happy to share my PowerPoint slides, and I'm also happy to share some recommended resources if you're interested in wondering what sort of things would be helpful for me to get my hands on that could enable me to learn more and to grow in my own generational intelligence. So with that, I think I will stop sharing my screen and bring us all back together.
All right. Thanks, Corey. Yeah, I really appreciate that. I appreciate this kind of, a focus on, as you say, and maybe an underaddressed aspect of cultural competency. So, uh, uh, learning a little bit of this of the GQ. So yeah, we have some commentary in the chat. Also, if you want to come off mute and speak up and maybe ask a question or some kind of engagement with Corey on this.
Thank you so much, Corey. Two quick things. One is just a very quick anecdote. When I was teaching at university, I'd had students who were very concerned about the incredibly slow rate of being able to download articles from the internet. And so I thought I would give them a little bit of a insight into my student experience. And I described going into the physical building and using a card catalog and writing it all down. And anyway, at the end of my little discussion, the question was, well, Ray, why didn't you just use your computer? They were horrified to hear that when I was a student at university the first time, there weren't personal computers. Computers were massively huge, and most people couldn't afford to buy a personal computer for their own use. It leads me to my question, and that is, in that situation, the students regarded me as some kind of, well, at the very least, a dinosaur. I wonder, Corey, what has your research into this topic revealed about the reverse, not the counselor's perception of the generational differences in their clients, but the reverse, the generation that the client is in, how do they view the counselor?
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that and I'm not aware of any research that speaks to that specifically within the therapeutic context. So any observations that I could share would be kind of from within the broader literature on intergenerational dynamics more generally. So I think that little synopsis that I provided earlier of hero and heretic, or hero and hypocrite, I think does speak to aspects of this. That there is a term that is used in the literature on chronological chauvinism. So it's this idea that because I have entered the scene or I've entered the chat in a more in the now kind of way, that I kind of stand in judgment of the generations that have come before me. So younger generations are more prone to view older generations through the lens of a chronological chauvinism, kind of like we know better, and you all probably should have known better too. But there is, of course, also at the same time a yearning, particularly as individuals journey into the young adult years, for meaningful intergenerational connection. So these things are often going on at the same time. Whereas with older generations, the research would suggest that older generations will, they will often play into that kids these days aspect of kind of standing in judgment of younger generations, but they will also be prone to want to accentuate the commonalities between themselves and younger generations. And some have tied this to Erickson's concept of generativity, and this idea that we want to feel that we are still relevant, to younger people. We want to feel a sense of connectedness to their experience. And so older generations will, on the one hand, kind of uh, complain about the younger generations, but will want to emphasize that, we are more similar than we are different. I don't know if that makes sense, what I'm fleshing out there. Thank you for asking that question, Ray.
Um, I had a question. Near the
Yeah.
beginning, there was a quote, and within that quote, just something stuck out, and I was wondering if you could kind of explain, maybe from your perspective, how that would be, probably because obviously you were quoting somebody. So, but they mentioned something about the artificial boundaries between childhood and adulthood. And can you either articulate more what they maybe would mean, or how you would interpret that kind of part of the quote? I think that was with
Yeah.
Newman, I can't remember the name of
Yeah.
it. Thanks.
Yeah. So he's essentially speaking about adolescence, which I think we can all validate as a developmental stage. He's speaking to it as a social construct, and this idea that there are certain transition points that have been built into the shape of our culture that signal transitions from adolescence into adulthood. And of course, the goalposts are shifting for that as culture changes. But we could think, for example, about some of these key transition points of graduation from school, or when one becomes eligible to vote or eligible to join the military, those kinds of things. So he's also kind of, I think, speaking to school as a bit of a socially constructed incubator space. So it's just this idea that while it is a stage in the life course, that it's also a social construct, and we've made certain decisions that give shape to it. And some of them, because you can vote at one age, you can join the military at another age, you can drink at another age. For guys, your insurance goes down at another age. It's actually a little diffuse where some of those boundary points are in reality. I hope that is helpful, Timothy.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I just want to make a comment and ask you to respond to this. Years ago, my son, attending Trinity Western, said that he attended a conference and heard that blessings are generational. And when I look around, I see, yes, that's my observation. Anyway, can you comment to that?
Well, I suppose I could reflect upon that theologically, but I think might actually be more interested in responding to that social scientifically, because there was some of you might be familiar with the work of Vern Bankston, who ran the longest or the largest longitudinal study of intergenerational families ever conducted. It spanned 45 years, and it led to the publication of a couple hundred articles and something like 99 books. And his last published book before he retired, at the end of it, was on the transmission of faith generation to generation. And he developed this concept called intergenerational faith momentum, or something like that. I think was the term that he used. And he really would affirm that social scientifically, that where there is vital faith that is being nurtured with certain healthy kinds of conditions, that there is a sense in which you can see that blessedness of faith being passed one generation to another. And one of his key findings was that if your dad is a jerk, or what he calls difficult dads, that can be one of the greatest disruptors to the passing of faith momentum one generation to the next. Or I guess we could say that it would be something that would sort of disrupt the passing of blessing one generation to the next. So that's what I have to say about that, Paul. I hope that resonates for you.
I was just gonna put a plug out there, Corey, for you're talking about awareness and curiosity, and we're trying not to relate just through sort of generational stereotypes and this type of thing. And when I've noticed the most engagement and challenge of each other was in the context of supervision, and particularly in group supervision when we were talking about a children's case, and you had certain folks that were relating to the parent, certain folks relating to the kids. And then as therapists, we were like, oh, I'm pulled more this direction, and I want to sort of, they need to behave better. I'm pulled more this direction. It was a really interesting dynamic, and to kind of be able to point that out in the group. I don't think I would have been able to do it if I was just thinking off by myself.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because perhaps could have mentioned that earlier, that when I was reflecting on how scant the literature is on this within the therapeutic community, that isn't true in the realm of counselor education and supervision. There's actually a rich literature that is looking at the supervisory and counselor education dynamics on this topic. So I'm
Yeah.
glad you said that.
All right, got time for probably one more question or comment, and then we'll probably move to our break here.
I dropped it in the chat, but I'd be curious your thoughts on it, Corey. I was just curious if you had any comments on the idea of Christ as a unification factor across generations, like the idea that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever, or how you might use the idea of Christ or biblical values or something as a connecting point or a bridge across generations when you do feel a gap. Assuming folks are open to it, of course, but. Yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I could probably, if given more time, respond to that more insightfully, but just in a very kind of shoot from the hip, off the cuff kind of way. I would say that I'm really inspired by what Dietrich Bonhoeffer says in Life Together, where I'm going to probably grossly paraphrase and hopefully not misrepresent when he essentially says that as Christians that we don't have direct relationships with one another, that our relationships with one another are always mediated by the presence of Christ in the space between us. And so that he would say that as the Holy Spirit indwells us, that the Jesus who abides in me is able to recognize and to dignify and honor the Jesus who resides within you. And so obviously that's very abstract. And like how do we actually live that out? In part, that's a spirituality. I think that we carry that influences how we conduct ourselves implicitly in our therapeutic work. But but that's what I got.
Corey, I had a question.
Hmm.
Um, when we're talking about awareness, something happened early in my life, which I thought was good as a young mother. Um, we were skiing. My son was, I think, 5 years old, and he said to me, we were on the chairlift going up and we were having fun, and he's looking around and goes, let's pretend we're really old. So, of course, my mind goes to about 80.
Oh
So I said,
no.
well, how old would we be? And he said 11. And so that went with me whenever I go. Like, I have to remember what I'm thinking isn't what other people are thinking. And that's
Hmm.
worked really well with my kids who are now adults, my grandchildren, who are like the same age as my kids were back then. But what I struggle with are my parents in their 90s
Mm.
because I don't have their lived experiences. I can understand the stages that my kids and my grandkids are going through to a bit of an extent, but I've never lived my parents' life. And as people in their 90s, I find it a little bit more, maybe it's just kids with parents. Maybe I'm less empathetic to them as my parents, but I do struggle with understanding, you know, where they come from or what their worldview was.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, Janice. Yeah. And I relate to that certainly, as somebody who's postured kind of as the middle child here within the life course. I've done a lot of reading that helps me understand intellectually with the experience of older people, and I can be empathetic toward that. But I'm with you. But at the end of the day, I don't have direct personal experience of that from the vantage point of the view from here. Yeah.
It's been really great, Corey. Thanks for this. Well, folks, let's move to our break here. As Heather reminded us, we got to move it for a little bit. And we what are you saying here? Okay. Yeah, we'll start up 11:15 on my watch here, just at the quarter hour here, and we'll be back in here to listen to hear from Candace. So looking forward to it. Thank you very much, Corey, and everybody for your interactions there. It's good. Thank you.